I was sitting in my doctor's waiting room when I overheard my daughter-in-law tell someone on the phone, "She won't last long. The doctors are just keeping her comfortable now." What she didn't know was that I had just received test results showing I was healthier than most people half my age. My name is Betty, and at 78 years old, I had become the subject of family conversations about my declining health, my limited life expectancy, and the practical arrangements that needed to be made for what everyone assumed would be my inevitable and imminent decline. The irony was almost too perfect to be coincidental. While Patricia whispered into her phone about my supposedly terminal condition, I was holding laboratory results that had just shocked my cardiologist, amazed my internist, and earned me an invitation to participate in a prestigious longevity research study at Johns Hopkins Medical Center. "The cancer markers are all negative." Patricia continued her phone conversation, apparently discussing my medical situation with someone who was interested in the timeline of my expected deterioration. "But at her age, with all the medications and the constant doctor visits, it's really just a matter of time." Cancer markers, medications, constant doctor visits. Patricia was creating a narrative of medical decline that bore no resemblance to my actual health status or my reasons for frequent medical appointments. The truth was that I had never had cancer, took no daily medications except a multivitamin, and visited doctors frequently because I was participating in cutting-edge research studies about healthy aging, longevity, and the genetic factors that allow some people to maintain exceptional health well into their later decades. But Patricia had constructed her own version of my medical reality based on assumptions about aging, observations about my healthcare routine, and perhaps wishful thinking about inheritance timelines that would be accelerated by my early demise. "I know it's hard to watch," Patricia said with what sounded like practiced sympathy, "but the doctors said there's nothing more they can do except manage her pain and keep her comfortable until the end." Pain management, comfort care, end-of-life planning. Patricia was discussing palliative care for someone whose medical team had just documented cardiovascular health that was superior to most 30-year-olds, cognitive function that tested in the top 10% for any age group, and cellular aging markers that suggested I could live comfortably for another 2 to 3 decades. I looked down at the test results in my hands: comprehensive blood work, cardiovascular assessments, neurological evaluations, and genetic analyses that painted a picture of exceptional health and longevity potential that contradicted every assumption Patricia was making about my medical condition. Dr. Sarah Martinez, my primary physician for the past 15 years, emerged from her office, carrying my file and wearing the expression of someone who had just reviewed results that challenged conventional understanding of aging and health maintenance. "Betty, are you ready to discuss your latest test results?" "Of course, Dr. Martinez." As I followed Dr. Martinez into her office, I could hear Patricia concluding her phone conversation with what sounded like timeline estimates for funeral planning and estate settlement. "I'd say 6 months at the outside, maybe less if the decline accelerates like the doctors expect." 6 months. Patricia was giving me 6 months to live, while my medical team was documenting health indicators that suggested I might outlive her by decades. Dr. Martinez closed her office door and spread my test results across her desk with the enthusiasm of someone who was about to share remarkable news. "Betty, I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, and I've never seen test results like these in someone your age. Actually, I've rarely seen test results this good in someone half your age." "What exactly do the tests show, Dr. Martinez?" "Your cardiovascular system is functioning at the level of a healthy 40-year-old. Your cognitive assessments score in the 95th percentile. Your cellular aging markers suggest that your biological age is approximately 62, not 78. Biological age of 62. While Patricia was planning my funeral, my body was functioning 16 years younger than my chronological age. But more importantly, Betty, your genetic markers indicate exceptional longevity potential. Based on these results, barring accidents or unexpected illness, you could easily live another 20 to 30 years in excellent health. 20 to 30 years. While my family was discussing my imminent decline, my medical team was documenting evidence that I might live to be over 100 years old with continuing good health and cognitive function. "Dr. Martinez, my family seems to think I'm dying. They've been making comments about my limited time and my need for comfort care." "Betty, what gave them that impression?" "I think they've made assumptions based on my frequent medical appointments and my age." Dr. Martinez looked puzzled. "But your frequent appointments are for research participation and preventive care. You're one of the healthiest patients in my practice. They don't know that. Betty, have you not shared your test results with your family? That was the question that addressed the heart of the miscommunication that had led to Patricia's phone conversation about my imminent demise. Dr. Martinez, I've been curious about how my family would treat me if they thought I was dying versus how they would treat me if they knew I was exceptionally healthy. And what have you discovered? I've discovered that their concern for my well-being and their interest in spending time with me seems to be motivated more by inheritance expectations than by genuine love for my company. Dr. Martinez nodded with understanding. Betty, you're not the first patient who has tested family relationships by allowing assumptions about declining health to reveal people's true motivations. And what do you typically recommend in these situations? That depends on what you want to accomplish and what you've learned about your family's priorities. What I had learned was disturbing but not entirely surprising. My frequent medical appointments had been interpreted as evidence of serious illness rather than proactive health management. My age had been assumed to predict imminent decline rather than continued vitality, and my family's increased attention and concern had been motivated by anticipation of my death rather than appreciation of my life. But here's what I hadn't told Dr. Martinez about my family's interest in my supposed medical decline. Here's the information that would complete her understanding of why I had been testing their motivations rather than sharing the truth about my exceptional health. Over the past 6 months, as Patricia and others had become convinced that my medical condition was deteriorating, their behavior toward me had changed in ways that revealed their true priorities and expectations. They had begun making suggestions about my living arrangements, my financial planning, and my end-of-life decisions that reflected more concern about inheritance management than about my comfort and preferences. They had started treating me with the kind of gentle, patronizing sympathy that people reserve for someone they expect to lose soon, rather than with the respect and engagement appropriate for someone who was healthy and expecting to live for decades. Most troubling, they had begun making decisions about my property, my belongings, and my future as if my death was imminent and my opinions about these matters were no longer relevant. Dr. Martinez, I think it's time to share these test results with my family, but I want to do it in a way that teaches them some important lessons about assumptions, respect, and the difference between caring about someone's death and caring about someone's life. What did you have in mind? I want to schedule a family meeting where you can present my medical results and explain what they actually mean for my health and my life expectancy. Betty, are you prepared for your family's reaction when they discover that their assumptions about your health have been completely wrong? Dr. Martinez, I'm prepared to find out whether their love for me is based on who I am or on what they expect to inherit when I die. That revelation would determine not just how my family understood my health and my future, but how they understood the relationships that had been built on false assumptions about my fragility, my dependency, and my limited time remaining. The question was whether they would be relieved to learn that I was healthy and likely to live for decades, or disappointed to discover that their inheritance timeline had been drastically extended. The family meeting I arranged took place in Dr. Martinez's conference room the following week, with Patricia, my son Michael, and my other daughter Lisa gathered around a table where my comprehensive medical results were displayed, like evidence in a case that would challenge everything they thought they knew about my health and my future. Thank you all for coming. Dr. Martinez began with the professional demeanor of someone who was about to deliver information that would surprise everyone in the room. Betty asked me to meet with you to discuss her recent medical evaluations and what they mean for her health going forward. Patricia sat forward with the expression of someone who was expecting confirmation of the terminal diagnosis she had been discussing on the phone for months. Doctor, we appreciate you taking time to explain Betty's condition. We know this must be difficult news to share. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I have some of the most positive medical news I've ever been able to share with a patient's family. Positive medical news. Not the terminal diagnosis confirmation that Patricia had been expecting. Dr. Martinez spread my test results across the conference table: blood work, cardiovascular assessments, cognitive evaluations, and genetic analyses that painted a picture of exceptional health rather than declining function. Betty's recent comprehensive health evaluation shows that she is in remarkable physical condition. Her cardiovascular system is functioning at the level of someone 40 years younger. Her cognitive abilities test in the top 10% for any age group. Her cellular aging markers suggest she has the biological age of a 62-year-old. The silence that followed was not the silence of people receiving comfort during a difficult medical discussion. It was the silence of people whose fundamental assumptions about a situation had just been proven completely wrong. "Doctor," Michael said carefully, "are you saying that Mom is not dying?" "Michael, barring accidents or unexpected illness, your mother has excellent prospects for living another 20 to 30 years in good health. Her genetic markers indicate exceptional longevity potential. 20 to 30 years. While Patricia had been giving me 6 months to live, my medical team was documenting evidence that I could live past 100 years old. But the constant doctor visits," Lisa said, looking confused. "We thought that meant she was receiving treatment for serious illness." "Lisa, your mother visits medical facilities frequently because she participates in research studies about healthy aging and longevity. She's being studied as an example of exceptional health maintenance, not as a patient requiring treatment." Patricia was staring at the test results as if they were written in a foreign language. "Doctor, I don't understand. Betty seemed so frail lately. She's been tired, and she's been talking about feeling her age." "Mrs. Patterson, can you give me specific examples of what made you think Betty was declining?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Well, she's been less involved in family activities. She seemed more withdrawn, and she's been spending a lot of time at medical appointments." Less involved in family activities, more withdrawn. What Patricia was describing as symptoms of medical decline were actually my responses to family behavior that had become focused on my expected death rather than my actual life. "Mrs. Patterson, have you considered that Betty's withdrawal from family activities might be related to how she's being treated by family members rather than to medical decline?" "What do you mean?" Dr. Martinez looked at me for permission to continue. I nodded. "Betty has shared with me that family members have been treating her as if she's dying, making decisions about her future as if her death is imminent, and showing interest in her mainly in the context of end-of-life planning. But we thought," Patricia started to speak, then stopped. "You thought she was dying, so you began treating her like someone whose opinions and preferences no longer mattered because her time was limited." Michael was reviewing my test results with growing amazement and what looked like embarrassment. "Mom, these results are incredible. You're healthier than I am. Why didn't you tell us?" "Michael, I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I was dying versus how you would treat me when you knew I was healthy and likely to live for decades." "And what did you discover?" "I discovered that when you thought I had limited time, you became interested in managing my affairs and planning my future. When you thought I was strong and healthy, you were less concerned about spending time with me or involving me in family decisions." Lisa had been quiet during this conversation, processing the implications of medical results that contradicted months of assumptions about our family's timeline and priorities. "Mom, what you're saying is that we've been treating you badly because we thought you were going to die soon." "Lisa, you've been treating me like someone whose preferences don't matter because you assumed my time was limited and my decisions were no longer relevant." "But we were trying to help. We thought we were making things easier for you during a difficult time." "Lisa, you were making decisions about my life without consulting me about my preferences. You were treating me with sympathy instead of respect. You were focused on my death instead of my life." Dr. Martinez interrupted with information that would complete their understanding of how wrong their assumptions had been. "I want to share something else with you about Betty's health status. Johns Hopkins Medical Center has invited her to participate in a prestigious longevity study. Researchers want to study her genetic markers, her lifestyle factors, and her health maintenance strategies as a model for successful aging." Johns Hopkins, one of the world's most prestigious medical institutions, wanted to study my health as an example of exceptional aging, while my family had been planning my funeral. The study could contribute to medical research that helps other people age as successfully as Betty has. Patricia finally found her voice. "Betty, I owe you an enormous apology. I've been telling people you were dying." "Patricia, who were you telling? And why?" "I was talking to my sister about practical arrangements, about what would happen to your house and your belongings when I died." Patricia had been discussing my property and my possessions with her sister, making plans for inheritance distribution based on her assumption that my death was imminent. "Patricia, what kinds of practical arrangements were you discussing?" "We were talking about estate planning, about how the family assets would be distributed, about who would be responsible for managing your affairs after I died." While I was sitting in medical research facilities being studied as an example of exceptional health and longevity, Patricia was discussing with her sister how to divide my property and manage my estate. "Patricia, my affairs don't need managing. My health is excellent. My cognitive function is superior, and my life expectancy suggests I might outlive everyone in this room. The truth was even more dramatic than what Dr. Martinez had shared with my family. The longevity research I was participating in had identified genetic and lifestyle factors that suggested I could live not just to 100, but potentially to 110 years old with continuing good health. While my family had been planning my funeral, medical researchers had been studying me as a potential case study in human longevity limits. But the most important revelation wasn't about my health or my life expectancy. It was about family relationships that had been based on assumptions about my fragility and my limited time, rather than on appreciation for my actual capabilities and my continuing potential for contribution and growth. So what happens now? Michael asked. Now we rebuild family relationships based on the truth about my health, my capabilities, and my expectations for living several more decades with all of you. And our behavior toward you? Michael, your behavior toward me will need to change from managing my decline to supporting my continued growth and contribution. That shift would require my family to fundamentally reconsider their assumptions about aging, their expectations about my role in family decisions, and their timeline for inheritance planning that had been based on completely false medical assumptions. The question was whether they would be happy to learn that I was healthy and likely to live for decades, or disappointed to discover that their expectations about inheritance and family responsibilities had been based on medical misinformation that they had created themselves. 2 weeks after the family meeting where Dr. Martinez revealed my exceptional health status, I was sitting in the research laboratories at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, participating in studies that would contribute to scientific understanding of human longevity and successful aging. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the lead researcher in the longevity study, was reviewing my comprehensive health data with the excitement of someone who had discovered something significant about the limits of human aging potential. "Betty, your health markers are so exceptional that we're using your case as a model for what optimal aging looks like. Your cardiovascular function, cognitive performance, and cellular health are redefining what we thought was possible for someone your age." "Dr. Chen, what makes my health different from other people my age?" "Several factors. Your genetic markers indicate exceptional longevity potential, genes that are associated with protection against age-related diseases and cellular damage. Your lifestyle factors, diet, exercise, stress management, social engagement, are optimized for health maintenance, and your cognitive activity levels suggest continued learning and mental stimulation that preserve brain function." But there was something else about my health status that Dr. Chen was particularly interested in studying. "Betty, we're also interested in the psychological factors that contribute to your exceptional health. Your medical history shows no significant chronic diseases, minimal use of medications, and remarkably low stress indicators." "What kind of psychological factors?" "Factors like sense of purpose, social connections, autonomy in decision-making, and optimism about the future. All of these psychological elements have been shown to influence physical health and longevity." Sense of purpose, social connections, autonomy in decision-making. The psychological factors that contributed to my exceptional health were exactly the factors that my family's assumptions about my declining condition had been undermining. "Dr. Chen, what happens to people's health when family members treat them as if they're dying or declining?" "Research shows that expectations about aging and health can become self-fulfilling prophecies. People who are treated as frail and declining often become frail and declining, while people who are treated as capable and healthy often maintain their capabilities and health longer. So my family's assumptions about my health could have actually damaged my health." "Absolutely. Psychological stress, loss of autonomy, and social isolation are all factors that accelerate aging and increase disease risk." The irony was profound. My family's assumptions about my declining health, if I had internalized them and accepted their limitations, could have actually caused the health decline they were expecting to observe. "Dr. Chen, how do families typically react when they discover that their elderly relatives are much healthier than they assumed?" "That varies dramatically. Some families are delighted to learn that their relatives have excellent health and longevity potential. Other families are—" Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "Other families are what?" "Other families are disappointed because their expectations about inheritance, caregiving responsibilities, and decision-making authority were based on assumptions about decline and dependency." "Disappointed." Some families were disappointed to learn that their elderly relatives were healthy, and likely to live for decades because it disrupted their plans for inheritance and control. Dr. Chen, have you researched the relationship between family attitudes toward aging and actual health outcomes for elderly adults? That's actually one of our current research areas. We're studying how family expectations and treatment affect the health and longevity of aging adults. And what are you finding? We're finding that elderly adults who are treated with respect, who maintain autonomy in decision-making, and who are valued for their continuing contributions, tend to have better health outcomes and longer lifespans than elderly adults who are treated as burdens or as people whose lives are winding down. This research had direct implications for my own family relationships and for the lessons I wanted to teach about aging, health, and the importance of treating elderly adults as capable individuals rather than as problems requiring management. My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia. "Betty, can we schedule a time to talk about your medical results? I need to understand how we got things so wrong about your health." Patricia wanted to understand how they had gotten things so wrong. The answer was that they had made assumptions based on age rather than investigating actual health status. They had interpreted proactive medical care as evidence of illness rather than evidence of wellness, and they had created narratives about my decline that reflected their expectations rather than my reality. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to speak with my family about the research on aging, health, and family relationships? Betty, I'd be happy to educate your family about successful aging and the factors that contribute to health and longevity in older adults, and about the psychological factors that can either support or undermine healthy aging. Especially about those factors, understanding how family attitudes affect elderly health outcomes is crucial for families who want to support their aging relatives' well-being. The family education session that Dr. Chen agreed to provide would address not just my individual health status, but the broader questions about how families can support successful aging, rather than inadvertently contributing to decline through assumptions and expectations. Betty, there's something else I want to discuss with you about the longevity research. What's that? Your case is so exceptional that we'd like to create a comprehensive case study that could be published in medical journals and used to educate other healthcare providers about optimal aging potential. What would that involve? Detailed documentation of your health markers, lifestyle factors, psychological well-being indicators, and family relationship dynamics that contribute to your exceptional aging outcomes. A comprehensive case study that would include family relationship dynamics as a factor in successful aging. My family's assumptions about my health would become part of medical research about how family attitudes affect elderly health outcomes. Dr. Chen, I'd be honored to contribute to research that could help other elderly adults maintain their health and autonomy despite family assumptions about aging and decline. And Betty, there's one more aspect of this research that might interest you. What's that? We're also studying intergenerational relationships and how adult children's attitudes toward aging affect their own aging process. Your family's assumptions about your health might actually predict their own health outcomes as they age. Intergenerational relationships. My family's assumptions about aging and decline might be setting them up for the same decline they had expected to observe in me. Dr. Chen, are you saying that people who expect aging to mean decline are more likely to experience decline themselves? Research suggests that people's expectations about aging significantly influence their own aging experience. People who expect to remain capable and healthy often do remain capable and healthy longer than people who expect aging to mean inevitable decline. This research had implications not just for my current family relationships, but for my family's future health and well-being, as they aged and faced their own questions about capability, autonomy, and family support. The longevity study I was participating in would contribute to medical understanding, but it would also provide my family with education about aging that could benefit them for decades to come. The question was whether they were ready to learn that aging doesn't have to mean decline, that health can be maintained well into the later decades of life, and that family attitudes play a crucial role in determining whether elderly adults thrive or deteriorate. The family education session that Dr. Chen conducted in her research laboratory was designed to teach my family about successful aging longevity research and the role that family attitudes play in determining whether elderly adults maintain their health and capabilities or experience the decline that so many families expect and inadvertently encourage. Patricia, Michael, Lisa, and my teenage grandchildren, Emma and Jake, gathered around a conference table where Dr. Chen had prepared presentations about aging research, health maintenance, and the psychological factors that influence physical well-being in older adults. Thank you all for participating in this educational session, Dr. Chen began. Betty's case is exceptional, but it's also instructive about what optimal aging can look like when the right factors are in place. Emma raised her hand like she was in school. Dr. Chen, what makes Grandma Betty's health so special? Emma, your grandmother represents what we call successful aging, maintaining excellent physical health, cognitive function, and psychological well-being well into the later decades of life. And that's unusual? Emma, it's less common than it should be. Partly because many people accept decline as inevitable, rather than working to maintain their health and capabilities. Dr. Chen displayed charts showing the difference between typical aging patterns and optimal aging patterns, demonstrating that much of what people consider normal aging is actually preventable decline. The research shows that people can maintain excellent health, cognitive function, and independence well into their 90s and beyond, if they have the right combination of genetic factors, lifestyle choices, and, Dr. Chen paused for emphasis, supportive family relationships. Supportive family relationships. The factor that my family had been undermining through their assumptions about my declining health and limited time. Dr. Chen, Patricia asked, what do you mean by supportive family relationships? Mrs. Patterson, supportive family relationships for aging adults include treating them as capable individuals, involving them in decision-making, respecting their autonomy, and maintaining expectations for their continued growth and contribution. And unsupportive family relationships? Unsupportive relationships include treating aging adults as burdens, making decisions for them without consultation, assuming decline is inevitable, and focusing on death and dependency rather than life and capability.
Michael was taking notes as Dr. Chen explained research findings that directly addressed his family's behavior toward me over the past months.
Dr. Chen, how do family attitudes actually affect elderly health outcomes? Michael, research shows that elderly adults who are treated with respect and expectations for continued capability tend to maintain their physical and cognitive health longer than elderly adults who are treated as if they're declining and dependent. So our expectations about aging can become self-fulfilling prophecies? Exactly. People who are expected to decline often do decline. People who are expected to remain capable often do remain capable. Jake had been listening with the focused attention of someone who was learning something important about family relationships and aging. Dr. Chen, does that mean that if we expect Grandma Betty to stay healthy and active, she's more likely to stay healthy and active? Jake, that's exactly what the research suggests. Positive family expectations combined with continued engagement and respect for autonomy support successful aging. Lisa asked the question that addressed the heart of the family dynamics that had led to their misconceptions about my health. Dr. Chen, how should families approach aging relatives differently than we've been approaching Betty? Lisa, families should ask about capabilities instead of assuming limitations. They should involve aging relatives in planning and decision-making instead of making decisions for them. They should focus on supporting continued growth and contribution instead of managing decline. And when medical appointments and health monitoring are involved, health monitoring and preventive care should be interpreted as evidence of wellness maintenance, not as evidence of illness. Proactive health care is a sign of successful aging, not a sign of decline. Dr. Chen presented research about the psychological factors that contribute to longevity and health maintenance in older adults. Studies show that sense of purpose, social engagement, autonomy in decision-making, and optimism about the future are all factors that contribute to better health outcomes and longer lifespans. And Betty has all of those factors? Betty has exceptional levels of all of those factors. She has strong sense of purpose, active social engagement, complete autonomy in her decision-making, and realistic optimism about her future health and longevity. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Dr. Chen, I think we've been undermining some of those factors without realizing it. How so, Mrs. Patterson? We've been treating Betty as if her future was limited, making decisions about her life without consulting her, and focusing on her death instead of her continued life and growth. And how do you think that affected Betty's psychological well-being? I think it probably made her feel disrespected and devalued. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Mrs. Patterson, that's exactly the kind of insight that can help families support successful aging instead of inadvertently contributing to decline. Emma asked the question that showed she understood the broader implications of the research Dr. Chen was presenting. Dr. Chen, does this research mean that how we treat elderly people affects not just their health, but their whole quality of life. Emma, that's exactly right. Family attitudes toward aging affect elderly adults' physical health, cognitive function, emotional well-being, and sense of purpose and value. So treating elderly people with respect and expecting them to stay capable is better for everyone? Emma, you've summarized the key finding of decades of aging research. Jake had a practical question about applying this research to family relationships. Dr. Chen, what should we do differently with Grandma Betty going forward? Jake, you should treat your grandmother as the healthy, capable, intelligent woman she is. You should involve her in family planning and decision-making. You should expect her to continue growing and contributing for many years to come. And we should stop treating her like she's dying? Jake, you should treat her like she's living fully, actively, and with every expectation of continuing to live fully and actively for decades to come. As the educational session concluded, Dr. Chen provided my family with research materials about successful aging, family support strategies, and the psychological factors that contribute to health and longevity in older adults. I want to leave you with one final thought, Dr. Chen said. Betty's exceptional health is partly due to genetics and lifestyle factors, but it's also due to her psychological resilience and her refusal to accept limitations that others might try to impose on her. What do you mean? I mean that Betty has maintained autonomy, purpose, and optimism despite family assumptions about her decline. Not all elderly adults are strong enough to resist family expectations about aging. Many people internalize the limitations that families impose and actually become limited as a result. That was the most important lesson for my family to understand, that their attitudes toward my aging could either support my continued health and capability, or contribute to the decline they had been expecting to observe. The choice was theirs about whether to treat me as someone who was thriving and likely to continue thriving, or as someone who was declining and needed their management and control. The research was clear about which approach would support better outcomes for everyone involved. 6 months after Dr. Chen's family education session, the dynamics in my family had transformed in ways that benefited not just my health and well-being, but everyone's understanding of aging, capability, and the importance of treating elderly adults with respect and expectations for continued growth. Patricia had become genuinely interested in aging research and had begun volunteering with senior advocacy organizations, using her experience with our family's misconceptions to help other families avoid similar mistakes. Betty, I wanted to share something with you, Patricia said during one of our monthly coffee meetings. I've been speaking to adult children's groups about the importance of investigating elderly relatives' actual health status instead of making assumptions based on age. And how are people responding? People are shocked to learn how their assumptions might be affecting their elderly relatives' well-being. I tell them about our family's experience, how we assumed you were declining and treated you accordingly, when you were actually healthier than any of us. Patricia had transformed her embarrassment about misjudging my health into advocacy work that helped other families recognize and support successful aging. Patricia, that's exactly the kind of education that can prevent other families from undermining their elderly relatives' health and autonomy through false assumptions. Betty, I also want to apologize again for the phone conversations where I discussed your supposed terminal condition. I realize now that I was creating a narrative of decline that had no basis in medical reality. Patricia, the important thing is that you learned from the experience and used that learning to help other families approach aging with better understanding and respect. Michael had begun including me in family financial planning and decision-making, recognizing that my excellent health and likely longevity made me a valuable partner in long-term family planning rather than someone whose declining condition required management. Mom, Lisa and I have been discussing college planning for Emma and Jake. We'd like your input about education investment strategies. Michael, I'd be happy to help with college planning. In fact, given my health status and longevity potential, I can make long-term commitments to educational funding that might not have been possible if your assumptions about my health had been correct. What do you mean? Michael, I mean that instead of planning for my imminent death, we can plan for my continued life and contribution for potentially 20 to 30 more years. Long-term planning that included my continued involvement and contribution, rather than planning that assumed my rapid decline and death. Lisa had begun approaching her own aging with a different perspective, recognizing that the research about successful aging applied to her future as well as to my present. Mom, Dr. Chen's research about aging and family attitudes has made me think about my own aging process. I want to make sure I'm preparing for successful aging instead of just accepting decline as inevitable. Lisa, what kinds of preparation are you thinking about? I'm thinking about lifestyle factors that support health maintenance, social connections that provide purpose and engagement, and psychological factors like autonomy and optimism that contribute to successful aging. And family relationships? And I'm thinking about how I want my children to treat me as I age. I want them to have expectations for my continued capability and contribution, not assumptions about my decline and dependency. Emma and Jake had become genuinely interested in aging research and had begun treating me as someone with expertise and ongoing potential for contribution, rather than as someone whose best years were behind her. Grandma Betty, Emma said, during one of our study sessions where I helped her with college application essays, I'm writing my application essay about aging and family relationships. Can I interview you about your experience with successful aging? Of course, Emma. What kinds of questions do you want to ask? I want to ask about how family attitudes affect elderly health, about the difference between aging and decline, and about what families can do to support successful aging instead of contributing to decline. Emma's essay would contribute to broader education about aging and family relationships, using our family's experience as an example of how misconceptions can be corrected and how families can learn to support elderly adults' continued growth and contribution. But the most significant transformation had been in my own understanding of the relationship between family support and health outcomes. Dr. Chen's research had confirmed that my exceptional health was partly due to my refusal to internalize family limitations and expectations about decline. Dr. Chen, I said during one of my research follow-up appointments, I want to ask you about something. Do you think my health would have been different if I had believed my family's assumptions about my declining condition? Betty, research suggests that people who internalize negative expectations about aging often experience the decline that others expect to observe. Your psychological resilience and your refusal to accept limitations that others tried to impose on you has been a significant factor in maintaining your exceptional health. So my family's assumptions could have actually caused the decline they were expecting. If you had internalized those assumptions and accepted the limitations they implied. Yes, expecting decline often leads to decline. Expecting continued capability often leads to continued capability. This insight had profound implications for elderly adults everywhere, whose families might be inadvertently contributing to decline through assumptions about aging and expectations about dependency. Dr. Chen, have you considered publishing research about the relationship between family attitudes and elderly health outcomes? Betty, that's exactly what we're working on. Your case study will be part of a comprehensive research paper about successful aging and the role of family support in maintaining health and autonomy in older adults. And the research will include recommendations for families? The research will include specific guidelines for families about how to support successful aging instead of contributing to decline through assumptions and expectations. As I prepared to leave Dr. Chen's office after another round of health assessments that continued to document exceptional aging and longevity potential, I realized that my family's misconceptions about my health had become the foundation for education that could benefit countless other families. The phone conversation where Patricia had discussed my supposed terminal condition had led to family education about successful aging, research participation that contributed to medical understanding, and advocacy work that helped other families recognize and support elderly adults' continued potential for health and contribution. But most importantly, it had taught my family that aging doesn't have to mean decline, that health can be maintained well into the later decades of life, and that family attitudes play a crucial role in determining whether elderly adults thrive or deteriorate. 2 years after overhearing Patricia's phone conversation about my supposed terminal condition, I was standing in the auditorium at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, preparing to give a keynote presentation about successful aging to an international conference of geriatricians, family physicians, and aging researchers. The research study I had participated in had generated significant findings about longevity potential, health maintenance in older adults, and the role of family relationships in supporting or undermining successful aging. Dr. Chen introduced me to the audience of medical professionals who had come from around the world to learn about innovative approaches to aging and health maintenance. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce Betty Chen, whose exceptional health and longevity markers have contributed to groundbreaking research about optimal aging. At age 80, Betty represents what successful aging looks like when the right factors are in place. Age 80. 2 years had passed since my family thought I had 6 months to live, and I was healthier than ever, participating in international research and contributing to medical education about aging potential. Betty's case study has been published in the Journal of Gerontology and has influenced how we understand the relationship between family attitudes and elderly health outcomes. The audience of medical professionals represented healthcare providers who would return to their practices with new understanding about aging potential and the importance of family education in supporting successful aging. But perhaps most importantly, Betty's story illustrates how family misconceptions about aging can be transformed into family education that benefits not just individual elderly adults, but entire communities' approaches to aging and elder care. As I approached the podium to address the international audience, I thought about the journey that had begun with Patricia's phone conversation about my supposed terminal condition and had evolved into research that was influencing medical understanding of aging potential. Thank you for inviting me to share my experience with successful aging and family relationships, I began. 2 years ago, my family thought I was dying. Today, I'm participating in research that suggests I might live to be over 100 years old in excellent health. The audience responded with appreciative laughter and applause. The difference between those two scenarios wasn't a change in my medical condition, it was a change in my family's understanding of aging, health, and the factors that support longevity and capability in older adults. I shared the story of Patricia's phone conversation, my family's assumptions about my declining health, and the medical results that had shocked everyone who thought they were planning my funeral. The lesson for healthcare providers is that families often make assumptions about elderly relatives' health based on age rather than investigating actual medical status. These assumptions can become self-fulfilling prophecies if elderly adults internalize the limitations that families impose. But the lesson for families is even more important. Your attitudes toward aging can either support your elderly relatives' continued health and capability, or contribute to the decline you might be expecting to observe. After my presentation, I was approached by healthcare providers from around the world who wanted to learn more about implementing family education programs in their practices. Dr. Sarah Williams, from the University of Sydney, asked about practical applications of the research. Mrs. Chen, how can healthcare providers help families recognize and support successful aging instead of contributing to decline through assumptions? Dr. Williams, healthcare providers can educate families about aging potential, involve elderly patients in treatment planning and decision-making, and help families understand that proactive healthcare is evidence of wellness maintenance, not evidence of illness. And what about families who are resistant to changing their assumptions about aging? Dr. Williams, I think families need to understand that their expectations about aging will likely affect their own aging experience. People who expect decline often experience decline. People who expect continued capability often maintain capability longer. Dr. Martinez from Barcelona had questions about implementing longevity research in clinical practice. Mrs. Chen, how can healthcare providers identify elderly patients who have exceptional aging potential like yours? Dr. Martinez, I think healthcare providers should assume that most elderly patients have potential for successful aging, unless medical evidence suggests otherwise. The default assumption should be capability and health maintenance, not decline and dependency. After the conference, I met with Patricia, who had traveled to Baltimore to attend my presentation and to see the research facilities where I continued to participate in longevity studies. Betty, listening to your presentation made me realize how much our family's understanding of aging has changed since that phone conversation where I said you wouldn't last long. Patricia, what's the most important thing you've learned about aging and family relationships? I've learned that how we treat elderly family members affects not just their well-being, but their actual health outcomes. Our expectations and assumptions can either support successful aging or contribute to decline. And going forward, I want to approach aging, both yours and eventually my own, with expectations for continued capability, health maintenance, and ongoing contribution, rather than assumptions about decline and dependency. As we toured the research facilities where my health continued to be studied as a model for optimal aging, Patricia asked the question that addressed the broader implications of my experience for families everywhere. Betty, do you think other families are making the same mistakes we made about elderly relatives' health and capabilities? Patricia, I think families everywhere are making assumptions about aging based on stereotypes rather than investigating actual capabilities and potential. The research suggests that these assumptions are contributing to unnecessary decline and dependency. So your story could help other families avoid those mistakes? Patricia, that's exactly why I'm participating in research and speaking at medical conferences. If our family's experience can help other families support successful aging instead of contributing to decline, then the misconceptions that led to your phone conversation about my terminal condition will have served an important purpose. Emma, now a college sophomore studying gerontology and public health, had driven up from her university to attend my presentation. Grandma Betty, your presentation was incredible. I'm using your research for my senior thesis about family attitudes and elderly health outcomes. Emma, what's your thesis conclusion? My thesis argues that successful aging is partly determined by individual factors like genetics and lifestyle, but significantly influenced by family attitudes and social expectations about aging potential. And your recommendations? I'm recommending that healthcare providers include family education about successful aging as part of routine geriatric care, and that families approach elderly relatives with expectations for continued capability rather than assumptions about decline. As the day concluded, and I prepared to return home to continue living the healthy, active, contributing life that my family had once thought was ending, I reflected on the transformation that had begun with a single overheard phone conversation. Patricia's assumption that I wouldn't last long had led to family education about successful aging, medical research about longevity potential, and advocacy work that was helping families around the world recognize and support elderly adults' continued capability and contribution. The moral of this story? Never assume that aging means decline, that medical appointments mean terminal illness, or that elderly adults' best years are behind them. Never make decisions about elderly relatives' futures based on assumptions about their health without investigating their actual medical status. And never underestimate the power of family attitudes to either support successful aging or contribute to unnecessary decline. That's how a phone conversation about my supposed terminal condition became the foundation for research about longevity and family relationships. That's how medical assumptions based on age became education about aging potential and successful health maintenance well into the later decades of life. Life has a way of proving that our assumptions about limitations are often more limiting than the actual conditions we think we're observing. Sometimes the most important discovery families can make is that aging doesn't have to mean decline, that health can be maintained for decades longer than expected, and that family support can be the difference between thriving and deteriorating as we age. I have more stories about elderly adults whose families underestimated their health, their capabilities, and their potential for continued contribution and growth. Stories about successful aging that defies stereotypes and proves that our best years don't have to be behind us just because we've accumulated more years than younger people think should be possible to live with vitality and purpose. So pull up a chair, maybe schedule a comprehensive health evaluation, regardless of your age, and remember that the person whose funeral you're planning might actually outlive you by decades if they're given the family support and medical care that promotes successful aging rather than managing expected decline. Because we're only just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next.